He checked his phone again. No message, no apology, no explanation. She had simply vanished. 3 years, countless nights spent building a life together. The travel plans, the quiet dinners, the late-night arguments about nothing and everything. All gone, erased in a single silent departure. He sat in the empty apartment, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort you, but crawls into your chest and twists itself around your ribs. He scrolled back through their last messages, trying to find the shift, the break, the moment he lost her. There was no fight, no drama, just space growing wider and colder. At first he did what most people do. He reached out to friends, drank more, worked longer hours. He thought if he moved fast enough, stayed busy enough, he wouldn't have to feel the gravity of her absence. But it followed him, into his office, into the gym, into sleep. Until one day, sitting on the train, he caught his own reflection in the window and didn't recognize it. Not because he looked different, but because he looked lost. That was the moment, the quiet crisis, the point where the mind whispers, something's off, not just with her, with you. We often think pain comes only when we're confronted, but sometimes the deepest fractures are the silent ones, the ones that don't shout, but echo. And so he did something that felt like failure in a world addicted to connection. He disappeared. He took a leave from work, moved out of the city, switched off his phone. Not because he wanted to become a monk, but because everything outside had grown louder than his own voice inside. He didn't want advice. He didn't want company. He wanted to hear himself again. We all chase healing in noise, drinks, conversations, distractions. But the truth is, real clarity begins the moment we allow the silence to stay long enough to speak. He found a cabin near a lake. No Wi-Fi, no TV, just wind brushing through pine trees and water lapping at the wooden deck. The first few days were unbearable. His mind screamed for input. His fingers twitched, reaching for a phone that wasn't there. Memories came without warning. Regrets, guilt, things he never said to her, things he said that he shouldn't have. He thought being alone would feel peaceful. It didn't. It felt like withdrawal. But something strange happened in that silence. By the 4th day, his breathing slowed. He began noticing the rhythms around him, the birds at dawn, the creak of the wood as it warmed under the sun, the way his own thoughts began to lose their edge. He started writing, not to impress, not to publish, just to understand. He wasn't writing about her anymore. He was writing about himself, about why her leaving had shattered him so deeply. And as he peeled back each layer of hurt, one truth emerged again and again. He had outsourced his meaning to the relationship. He had made her the reason he felt alive. This wasn't about love lost. It was about self forgotten. Most people don't fear being alone. They fear meeting the version of themselves they've been running from. He remembered something he read in a weathered copy of Meditations left behind in the cabin's shelf. Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. Marcus Aurelius. At the time he read it, it sounded poetic. Now it felt personal. He realized solitude wasn't a retreat from life. It was a return to it. Not a place to hide, but a place to strip away everything that was never really yours. Out here, there was no need to be charming, no pressure to be funny, no one to perform for, just raw, uncomfortable truth. And slowly, quietly, it became something else. It became clarity. He started waking up before dawn, watching the fog lift from the lake. He began eating slowly, intentionally, feeling the texture of the food. Every act, from washing dishes to chopping wood, became its own kind of meditation. He wasn't trying to heal anymore. He was simply being. He noticed how little he actually needed. How much of his former life was bloated with urgency. Texts, calls, pressure, opinions, and yet none of it made him stronger. This solitude was doing what no advice ever could. It was burning away the noise, not to leave him empty, but to make room for something deeper. True power isn't found in a title or a relationship or applause. It's born in the moments when no one is watching, when you stand alone and still choose not to fall apart. He thought a lot about strength during those days. Not the kind you show in the gym, not the kind that wins debates or builds businesses, but the kind that allows you to sit in a storm of uncertainty and not flinch. He remembered his father once told him, "Real men don't break." But he'd come to see now it wasn't about not breaking, it was about breaking quietly and rebuilding in silence. Every evening after the sun dipped behind the trees, he sat on the porch with a small fire, no music, just the crackling of wood. And the questions came, not all at once, but slowly, one by one, like whispers that had been waiting for years to be heard. Why do I need to be needed? Why does silence feel like punishment? Why did her leaving feel like erasure instead of release? He had spent years in relationships, romantic and otherwise, anchoring himself to others' approval, always checking if he was enough through their reactions. If they smiled, he felt worthy. If they pulled away, he panicked. He had never really stood alone. Solitude showed him how heavily he had leaned on everyone else for balance. He reread another line from Marcus: "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." It wasn't what he wanted to hear, but it was exactly what he needed. His thoughts had been noisy, fragmented, reactive, not because life was chaotic, but because he never learned how to be still inside himself. He had tried to solve life externally through people, projects, distractions, without ever learning how to listen internally. In the stillness, he discovered something that felt both terrifying and liberating. You are responsible for your inner life. No one is coming to fix it. No one is coming to tell you who you are. And when you finally sit with yourself, without escape, that's when the real work begins. It's not the world that's too loud. It's that we've forgotten how to hear ourselves in it. The days turned into weeks, and without meaning to, he began to change. His back straightened, his gaze settled, his inner dialogue softened. He didn't become cold, he became clear. He began to notice how much of modern life was built around avoiding solitude. We drown ourselves in connection, scrolling, texting, liking, not because we're social creatures, but because we fear being with ourselves. Solitude exposes you. It holds up a mirror and says, "This is who you are," without applause. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid of that reflection. He realized something else. Solitude doesn't isolate you. It prepares you, because out there, away from noise, you sharpen. You see who you are when no one is clapping. You discover which values hold firm and which ones crumble under pressure. He wrote often in his journal, "I thought I needed her love to feel whole, but what I needed was space to face myself without the mask." And isn't that the gift of solitude? It strips away the masks we wear to please the world, so we can meet the person we were always meant to be. What if the version of you that greatness requires can only emerge in silence? One morning before dawn, he stood barefoot in the frost-covered grass, his breath visible, his fingers numb, but his mind calm. He remembered how just weeks ago a moment like this would have felt unbearable, too quiet, too slow, too empty. Now it felt sacred. He stood there until the sun peeked over the horizon. No epiphany, no dramatic realization, just presence. That was the power of solitude. Not to give answers, but to teach you how to sit with the questions without needing to escape. He remembered Epictetus once said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." And he understood now to walk away from the noise, to disappear from social feeds, to be alone without apology. People might think you're lost, but in truth, you're just beginning to find a deeper kind of strength. Out there in the quiet, he didn't find perfection. He found presence. And presence, he learned, is the foundation of power. Because when you stop needing the world to validate you, when you stop chasing approval like oxygen, you become dangerous, not because you seek control, but because you are no longer controlled. The most powerful man in the room is not the loudest. He's the one who no longer needs to prove anything at all. He eventually returned to the city, not because he was healed, but because he was whole enough to begin again. He re-entered his world, but everything looked different. The same coffee shops, the same colleagues, but now his silence had depth. He didn't fill empty spaces with nervous talk. He didn't chase closure or connection. People noticed. They asked, "Did something happen to you?" And he'd just smile. He no longer needed to explain. That was another lesson from Solitude. You don't owe the world your story. You owe yourself your truth. And when you carry that truth quietly, you become someone others feel, even when you say nothing at all. He walked slower now, not because he had less to do, but because he no longer feared being left behind. In the past, he moved fast to prove something, to be someone, to catch up to an invisible standard that always seemed just out of reach. But now, even in the same city streets, he walked like a man who had nothing to prove, and people felt it. In meetings, he listened more than he spoke. In conversations, he let silence breathe between words. He didn't interrupt. He didn't posture. He wasn't trying to be seen anymore, because something had shifted. He had tasted solitude, and it left him full. And those who are full don't hunger for validation. He realized how much energy he used to spend shaping himself into what others needed. Now he was simply there, present, steady, grounded. Some called him distant, some called him cold, but they were wrong. He wasn't distant, he was anchored. He wasn't cold, he was calm. He began to understand a deeper truth. Solitude wasn't a chapter, it was a practice, just like strength or discipline or love. It had to be returned to again and again. And so, even amidst the noise of the city, he carved out time for silence. 10 minutes in the morning, eyes closed, no phone. A walk in the park without music. A weekend each month with no plans. Not because he was escaping, but because he was returning. We don't lose ourselves in the noise all at once. We lose ourselves in inches, every time we ignore the quiet call to turn inward. One evening, he sat alone on his balcony as rain danced on the concrete. No thoughts, no goals, just the rhythm of water, the soft hum of a world continuing without needing him. And in that moment, he understood something he couldn't have grasped before. Solitude isn't the absence of others. It's the presence of yourself. It's the clearing of mental clutter, the silence between overthinking and true knowing. It's not lonely, it's honest. It's not empty, it's sacred. He smiled. He thought back to how it all began, with heartbreak, with pain, with a silence that had once felt like punishment. But now, silence felt like home. Some of life's most painful endings are not punishments, they're invitations to meet yourself. He began to reread the Stoics, not as philosophy, but as mirrors. And the words hit differently now. They weren't ideas to admire, they were reminders of what he already knew in his bones. Man is not worried by real problems so much as by his imagined anxieties about real problems. Epictetus. He remembered the anxiety that used to clutch his chest in the mornings, not because anything was wrong, but because he wasn't right within himself. He now understood the storm wasn't out there, it was in here. And solitude had taught him to stop fearing the storm and start listening to it. Every Stoic lesson was less about controlling the world and more about mastering your inner weather. Let others chase the wind. Let them react to every flicker of emotion, every like, every comment, every headline. He chose stillness, not because he didn't care, but because he cared differently now. He no longer needed to be seen winning. He no longer feared being misunderstood. He just needed to live in alignment, to keep his soul intact, to walk through the world without losing himself in it. In solitude, you don't learn how to escape the world. You learn how to walk through it untouched. One night, a friend came over, someone he hadn't seen since before the breakup. They caught up, laughed, shared stories, and at one point his friend said, "You've changed. You seem quieter, but more here." He nodded. There was nothing to explain. You don't need to preach presence. You simply embody it. And those who are searching feel it, not as words, but as weight. He realized something else that night. The more deeply rooted you become in yourself, the less you need to be understood. Solitude gives you that root. The strength to be misunderstood without crumbling. The wisdom to observe without reacting. The courage to walk away without bitterness. That's why the world doesn't teach solitude. Because a man who is whole by himself can't be manipulated. He's not desperate. He's not dependent. He's dangerous, but not in the way we usually mean. Not reckless, not cold, not hardened, but deeply still. And in that stillness, he is unshakable. When a man no longer fears being alone, he becomes the kind of man others instinctively trust and secretly envy. He began waking before sunrise again, not because he had to, but because those first moments before the world rushed in felt holy. He didn't journal to fix anything anymore. He journaled to remember, to stay grounded, because the city had a way of creeping back in. The noise, the pressure, the urgency. But now he had armor, not built from walls, but from awareness. He could enter the storm and not lose himself in it. He could face conflict and not absorb its poison. He could sit with others and not become what they needed him to be. And that was power. Quiet, humble, stoic, not the kind that shouts, the kind that stands, unmoved. He once believed greatness was a destination, a peak you climbed, an applause you earned, a moment when the world finally turned and said, "You've made it." But solitude taught him something else. Greatness is not an arrival. It is a shedding, a quiet unraveling of what is false, a returning to what is essential. He thought about all the versions of himself he had worn like armor, the ambitious one, the funny one, the desirable one, the one who always had a plan, and how none of them could stand the weight of true stillness. Only the honest one could survive the silence. And it turned out that was the only version worth keeping. He no longer feared losing people. He no longer clung to outcomes. He no longer needed to explain the path he walked, because the path had become internal, invisible, rooted, and therefore unshakable. You become truly powerful the day you realize you can lose everything except yourself. One morning, while hiking a trail near the edge of the city, he came across an old tree, its trunk split, its bark gnarled from storms. It had clearly endured years of wind and rain, but it stood, not tall, not beautiful, but firm, alive. He sat beneath it for an hour, not thinking, just feeling. And he saw himself in that tree, not as something that had survived, but as something that had outgrown the need to be anything else. The storms weren't proof of weakness. They were proof of weathering, of becoming. He thought about the men he used to admire, loud, charismatic, relentlessly visible. Now he admired something else, stillness, depth, quiet strength. He no longer wanted to be impressive, he wanted to be real. And there is a kind of greatness that lives in that shift. At some point, every man must choose, chase admiration or cultivate depth. He began to speak less in crowds, not out of insecurity, but because he had nothing to prove. He didn't need to outshine. He didn't need to be understood. He had learned that silence is not weakness, it's space. And in that space, real connection can happen. He no longer chased women to feel seen. He no longer needed their softness to soothe his wounds. He didn't expect anyone to complete him because he wasn't half anymore. When love came, if it ever did again, it would not be from desperation. It would be from overflow. He had made peace with his aloneness. He had come to cherish it, not as a defense, but as a sanctuary. And that changed everything. Until you learn to enjoy your own company, every connection you chase is just an escape. He remembered a final passage from the Stoics, one he used to skim over, too abstract, too poetic, but now it made sense. Bone deep. Withdraw into yourself. It is in the nature of the rational mind to be self-content with acting rightly and the peace this brings. Marcus Aurelius. That was it. Peace not through control, but through alignment, not from conquering the world, but from no longer needing to. His ambitions didn't disappear, but they became anchored. He still wanted to build, still wanted to lead, still wanted to leave something behind, but not to be remembered, not to be applauded. He wanted to serve what was true, to move with integrity, to rise quietly with no applause but the echo of his own conscience. He no longer lived outward in, he lived inward out. When the inner world is ordered, the outer world cannot control you. One night, the rain returned. He turned off the lights, lit a candle, and sat on the floor. He didn't meditate. He didn't plan. He just watched the flame flicker, and in the flicker he saw everything. The man he used to be, full of noise, fear, hunger. The woman who left, who in her absence gave him the gift of returning to himself. The silence that once felt like a prison, now a doorway. He saw his path, not as a straight line, but as a spiral, one that led not forward, but inward. He saw solitude not as loneliness, but as a sacred teacher. And in that flicker, he found a wordless truth. That power, true power, is not domination. It is discipline. It is detachment. It is the strength to hold yourself when everything else falls away. And it is the wisdom to know that falling away is not the end. It is the beginning. The flame burned low. The wax had pooled into stillness. Outside, the rain softened into mist. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel broken. He simply felt here, fully, quietly, without need, without pretense. And that's what no one tells you about solitude. It doesn't make you feel like a god. It doesn't give you answers carved in stone. It simply makes you real, like wood that's been weathered, like stone that's been smoothed by water, like a mountain that doesn't shout but still shapes the wind around it. In solitude, you stop searching for significance, and instead, you become it. He thought of a river. It doesn't argue, it doesn't chase. It carves canyons in silence. It moves mountains without fury. That, he realized, was the kind of man he wanted to be. Not a spark that draws attention, but a current that changes the landscape, slowly, imperceptibly, without demanding credit. The world will always chase spectacle, but solitude teaches you to revere what endures. There is no applause in the early morning hours, no audience when you make peace with your past, no spotlight when you choose presence over distraction, but those are the hours where greatness is born, unseen, uncelebrated, unshakable. Not every transformation needs a witness. Some of the most profound changes happen where no one is looking, except you. In the end, he did not become someone else. He became himself, the version that doesn't flinch in silence, that doesn't rush to fill the space, that doesn't bend to be accepted, that doesn't perform to feel worthy. He just is. And that was enough, because the man who can stand in solitude, who can look into the void without turning away, who can carry his own weight without resentment, that man carries something the world cannot take from him: presence, principle, peace. He no longer feared the days when no one called. He welcomed them. He no longer filled every moment with music, screens, voices. He craved the stillness. He no longer mourned the ones who left. He thanked them for freeing him to walk his own path. He no longer chased power. He had become it, not the kind that shouts across rooms, but the kind that makes rooms quieter just by entering. The candle finally died. Smoke curled upward into the dark. He smiled, not because he was happy, but because he was whole. There was nothing left to add, nothing to fix, nothing to chase. Only this, a man sitting alone and not needing anything more. And in that moment, he understood what the Stoics meant by virtue. Not moral superiority, but inner alignment. Not escape from suffering, but the clarity to face it. Not the absence of challenge, but the presence of self. He stood. The rain had stopped. The city lights flickered in the distance, unaware that something unshakable had just emerged from the quiet. He would return to the world. He would speak again. He would love again. He would build. He would lead. But now all of it would come from the deepest place, from the still river beneath the noise, from the fire that didn't burn to be seen, from the solitude that had taught him that true power does not require an audience.